And we're back again for another week of Record Live. And Zanita, it feels like deja vu, but we say this every week. It's one of our favorite parts of the week to have this conversation with each other. And when we get a special guest, it's even more special.
Totally. It's always good fun.
Now, we do have a special guest today. She's come on for the first time on Record Live. So welcome, Ashley. It's great to have you. Now,
Thank you for
Ashley,
having me.
no worries. Ashley has started with Adventist Record. Some of you might have read or have seen Danelle's name in the masthead. Danelle went on maternity leave at the very start of this year, and Ashley has come in to fill the role that Danelle held. And so, yeah, it's been really great to have Ashley on the team. She's written a couple of very interesting articles. There's one that's just recently come out about supporting PKs, pastors' kids. So that's, there's a lot to talk about there. But today we're going to just get to know Ashley a little bit more and to, I guess, think about this concept of third culture kids. Now, some of our audience might not be familiar with what that is. And so we'll get Ashley in a moment to give us a bit of her background, where she's come from, how being a third culture kid fed into her experience. But we've called today's episode Third Culture Kids, where mission and identity clash. And, you know, as Christians, we often want our identity to be founded in Christ. And we also want to be doing mission. And yet many times there are unexpected fallouts of mission work. There are unexpected things that happen. And so we're going to reflect on some of those big themes and big ideas today in about the next half hour. But yeah, as I said, Ashley, it's great to have you. Thank you for being willing to share your experience with us today. And maybe if we can just start with some of your background and what is a third culture kid, or how you define a third culture kid and how you fit that definition. What does your background look like in that space?
Yeah, so a third culture kid is someone who grows up in a culture that is different to their parents' culture. And it's called a third culture kid because this kid kind of stands between their parents' culture and the new culture, and they kind of create their own. And so that's the third. And yeah, for me personally, I kind of grew up across 4 different cultures, living in 3 different countries. When I was little, I lived in Australia and then in Fiji, and then I spent quite a few years in the United States before moving back to Australia when I was 18. And I have Polish Australian parents, so I also kind of have that Polish background. And we've grown up speaking some Polish in our house. So yeah, so just those 4 different cultures. Yeah.
I have friends who have definitely had like the 2 different sides, where they've had a family from this country and a family from this country, or maybe it hasn't been a country as such, but it's been like my mum believes this and my dad believes this, and it's this kind of like tug of war, or like this journey of like, oh, what do I do and who am I? But you've got another step there. You've got 4 different countries. But was there a period in your life, I know you shared some stories in your article, but was there a period in your life where you realized, oh, hang on, this isn't normal, or this isn't how everyone else lives?
Yeah, I think it was when I left Fiji. I think I was 7 years old. And before then, life had just kind of been normal. I guess as a little kid, you don't really think about these things. You know, the most important things in your life are your parents, and you don't think about the outside world as such. And for me, it was just really normal, my life. And then when we left, suddenly my sister and I remember we had a lot of conversations about, you know, what was happening, where were we moving now? And yeah, so I think that's kind of when it started.
Do you think, Ashley, there's a difference between, many people are children of immigrants? You've described how your parents were Polish Australians, so you had some background or some speaking another language at home, and yet it seems to me that a third culture kid in terms of the definition is a little different to, say, a second generation Australian. So someone might move here and they've got some culture at home that's different to the culture around them, but they still there's definitely disconnect there. But it seems like a third culture kid is almost like the parents and the dominant culture that they've grown up in is then transplanted to a whole different culture, and yet they still have roots back, so they still define themselves as from where they've come from. It's a bit more complex, or am I
Yeah,
wrong? Is it the same
no,
thing?
you're not wrong. It's not quite the same thing. So there's this umbrella term of a cross-cultural kid, and underneath, both an immigrant kid and a third culture kid kind of both fit under that cross-cultural. So it is slightly different, but I think, both come with challenges.
Can you just tell us some of those challenges? I guess, you've told us that you had a lot of different experiences and different cultures that you had to adjust to every time you moved. But what does that do as a young person? Like, what does that do as a child trying to find your way and to navigate all the differences around you?
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of my life, I guess, feeling like I didn't quite belong. Wherever I always felt like I was from somewhere else. So in America, I felt like I was from Australia. And then, moving back to Australia, I felt like I was from America. And I'm always, from somewhere else. And that kind of contributes to a lot of feelings of not belonging. And I also feel like a lot of my life has felt very temporary. Everywhere I have lived, I have known that it is not forever. I have known that I'm going to move again. And I think for the first time in my life, I don't actually know if I'm going to move to another country now. And it's kind of strange. And I still feel kind of stuck in that. Is it still temporary? Is it not? So, yeah.
True. You wrote in your article along the same lines. You wrote, Fiji was my third country and the first home I remembered. Sydney was big and strange, but we weren't staying. And we felt for sure that America would be our home. So it's kind of what you're saying. Like, you were always looking for this place to settle and to call home and to kind of find that sense of maybe not security, but that place that you would kind of remain. And I guess I'm curious if you've found any resolve in that. Like, I know that you said it's the first time that you don't like see yourself going anywhere, or you don't know where you're going to go next. But do you feel like you're home in Sydney, or do you feel like you've found that home in something else, or what's kind of happened with that, I guess, that experience?
Well, I don't know if I fully found it, to be honest. I've moved to Sydney like 2 months ago, so
Yeah.
I don't think I can fully call it home. But I feel like Australia is home at this point, and it's taken a long time to get to that point. And I think it also depends on where my family is, and the majority of my family is in Australia. And I feel like my worldview, I guess, lines up most with what people here kind of how they see the world. And so I feel like I have found where I fit most, but I don't think I'm ever going to feel like I belong completely, like 100%, like someone who was born and raised in Australia. If that makes sense.
I think on some level we can all relate to that a little bit. Like, for myself, I have seasons of feeling very lonely or isolated. We've talked about this on the show before, Sanita. I think as an adult, you get into a period where you have maybe young kids, and so you can't hang out with your friends who don't have kids again. Like, it's harder to make social dates and things, so you're not seeing as many people, and so you can get into these seasons of, I guess, that same kind of disconnect. Like, where do I fit? Who are my people? Where is my tribe? Like, and so I think on many levels people can relate. But what's the mental sort of state or the emotional sort of state when you mentioned that it always felt temporary? What does that mean for friendships and for I guess, life plans. When you're making life plans, is it harder to do that because you think, oh, it's going to be ripped away, I'm going to have to move schools again, or so I can't really maybe give myself fully to these relationships? Like, is there a sense of that?
Well, at this point, I don't really make plans for my life. But I think I was lucky because I had a lot of stability through my teen years. When we lived in the States, we moved when I was 7. We were only supposed to be there for like 4 or 5 years, and so I do remember it being quite difficult. I had made a group of friends, and we really struggled kind of together with the idea, oh, I'm leaving, I'm moving. And then we didn't end up moving. We ended up staying until I was 18. And so I had stability for a time, but I always knew we were going back. And so that did affect it to some degree. And I always knew that I was probably going to go to university in Australia, that I wasn't going to stay in the States. And I feel like there are other TCKs who have it worse because, they do move every 2 years and they do have to keep moving schools. And I was lucky that I did get to go to the same school. But yeah.
I think it's interesting because when we were toying with what to title this article, Jared mentioned that we've talked a lot about identity and belonging, and I think those two words are kind of buzzwords today. Like we do talk about them a lot, and culture is talking about them a lot, and it's probably because it's something that people have struggled with throughout all mankind. But I think there's probably a lot more at play right now because maybe previous cultures were a lot more communal. Like you mentioned that you lived in Fiji and that was like the first place you felt like that home and that belonging. But these days people are much more like individualistic. And so I think it's probably a lot more common for people to feel that sense of like they don't belong somewhere, or they can't find that, or they can't find that like perfect friendship or that perfect community that they're kind of looking for. So did you experience that kind of differently in different cultures? Like, did you feel more of a sense of that in Fiji because they probably were more communal, or was it just kind of like everywhere you went, it was the same kind of absence of home?
Well, I think it was less dependent on the culture itself and more dependent on my age, if I'm being honest. I don't think I really noticed that, sense of community in Fiji as such. I was quite young. I do remember it quite well, but I think my world kind of revolved around, my parents and my family more as such. I think America is a bit more individualistic than, say, Poland or even Australia might be. Even I know my parents struggled in America trying to, reach out to people and create a sense of community, and just really struggling with that. And it also didn't help that where we lived in America, it was kind of a very specific community. It was very transient. So people were coming and going constantly from all over the world. It wasn't like this set community where everyone was born and raised in one place. And so, yeah, I think that had an effect.
You came back to Australia, you did your university years, and then you took off to Poland.
Yes, I did.
You did a gap. It's kind of like a gap year, or you were going to go teach English there and different things there. Was that part of finding your identity? Like, were you searching for something there? Were you trying to connect with your roots? Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so as I said, I've grown up feeling at least a little bit Polish, speaking some Polish at home, having Polish parents, Polish grandparents, and that was always kind of the thing that stayed the same. It was the one place I hadn't lived, but it was my cultural background, I guess you could say. And my grandparents would always say things like, "Oh, you're Polish. You're pure Polish blood," and and I decided when I was about 12 that I was going to go for a year to Poland to do something. I didn't know exactly what. I had cousins who had done it. I'd heard of other people, going away for a year, and I was like, I'll go to Poland and I'll find myself. I'll find the country that, is really my country. And it didn't quite go as planned. I think my time in Poland, I felt the least Polish that I have ever felt in my life. And that was kind of confronting at first, to show up and then realize that nobody there actually considered me Polish. I was very Australian over there. That kind of goes back to the wherever I am, I, feel like I'm from somewhere else. And yeah, being in Poland made me think a lot about this topic about, identity. And I feel like it helped me make my peace with a lot of it. And yeah, just some of the things that I learned. And I think coming back, I feel a lot more settled being in Australia than before. It's like I realized that I was happy in Australia, that I was happy for Australia to be my home.
Hmm. Can you flesh that out a little bit more? Like what was that kind of like an epiphany you had, like other than you realized Australia was your home? Or like what was your thought process going on while you're in Poland that kind of shifted that mindset for you?
Well, I think it was a very slow process. I think it took the whole year, to be honest. And I had to deal with a lot of questions. People in Poland were constantly asking me, why I was there. And they weren't just satisfied with, oh, I'm teaching English for the year. They wanted to know why I had chosen to come to Poland. Why had I come back to the country where my family had left? Why would I want to leave Australia to go to Poland? And at first, I always tried to explain, and I felt like nobody quite got it. I feel like a lot of people didn't quite understand my need to kind of go back or not even go back, go to where my family's from and kind of see for myself if it would mean anything for me. But I learned over the year that it didn't. It wasn't about the country itself, but it was more about the people themselves. And I think that was part of it, that I learned I could find belonging with specific groups of people. And I think it also sunk home that I could find belonging and identity in God, that it didn't matter that I didn't find complete belonging on earth, because I would one day. Yeah.
Yeah, the world is not my home sort of idea. In C.S. Lewis writes in The Last Battle about sort of Aslan's country and going further up and further in. And when they get there, it's very much a reflection of what they'd known before, the country, the land that they'd known before, but magnified, like
Yeah.
more filled with meaning, more wonderfully smelling, more flavorful, more bigger and better. Obviously it was a allegorical representation of sort of heaven and God's, I guess, plan for us, God's picture for us, and so what you're describing sort of sounds a little bit like, well, that comes to mind when you're describing that, what God's intention for us is to have these fuller lives, and when we then look back on some of our disconnect with others, our dislocation from place and people and country and culture, it's sort of like, because those things are sort of pale imitations in some sense of what God had in store for us and wants us to eventually have when he restores all things. But yeah, we're in a broken world, and so not everything works perfectly, I suppose. And yeah, thank you for sharing, I guess, some of that journey for you, because it can be really an existential crisis. It could really make you question your identity, and yet you seem to have found that answer. And I just want to push back. People could be watching this or listening to this and thinking, well, that's nice, but it's sort of sweet by and by, pie in the sky sort of stuff. It's not real. Like, it's a cliched answer. It's a Christian answer. But I'm sensing, as you're sort of sharing with us, there's a real wrestle in that journey, that it took you, as you said, it took you that year, but in some senses it's taken your whole life to realize that your identity needs to be based in God rather than achievements or place or culture or people. And can you just flesh that out a little bit? We're Christians, obviously. We're talking about church and culture a lot on this show, this podcast. What should our identity look like, you think, after what you've discovered with your year in Poland and reflecting on some of this dislocation in your own life? Like, what should our identity, how should we construct our identities? What should that be based on? What should it look like?
Well, I think it comes with a realization first of, maybe that cliche answer of realizing that Earth is not our forever home, and we do have something to look forward to. Specifically, well, there are a lot of verses in the Bible that I guess have helped me along the way. There's one in Proverbs, and maybe I take it a little bit out of context, but it's, the righteous will never be uprooted. And I think in this whole idea of third culture kids, we often talk about being uprooted and having roots and everything. And so it's understanding that your roots don't necessarily have to be in a place, or they don't even necessarily have to be in other people, but your roots can be in something greater.
I like that. I'm also probably guilty of taking verses out of context. So don't worry. But I think if it helps you and it's like giving you strength, then it's totally fine. But I guess in talking about like knowing that you have a eternal home and knowing that, our roots can be in Jesus, has that been because sometimes we can say this stuff and we act kind of differently, or we still kind of are searching for things. Has that been enough for you, or have you had to kind of like, has it been a bit of a mind game on top of that, or have there been like things you've actually had to kind of do to believe that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, it hasn't been fully enough. Like I feel like it's a large aspect of it, but it's not enough just to say my identity is in Jesus, nothing else matters, I think we were created to have connections. I mean, even Adam was created, and then God created someone else so that he wouldn't be lonely. And I mean, even like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, belonging, I think, is in the middle, right after food and water and safety, and then you have belonging. So we were created for connection. We were created to be able to feel like we belong. And, unfortunately, a lot of people don't feel like they belong for various reasons, not just being a third culture kid. And so there is that, kind of constant clash between trying to keep your eyes on what you believe, that, you are rooted in Jesus and that's enough, and your desire to, fit in and have your life make sense on earth.
Are there any benefits of being a third culture kid? Like, we talk a lot about some of the difficulties and some of the, existential wrestling, and that's important. Like, people are dealing with that, and they have to process that for their faith and their lives to make meaning, find meaning in that. But what about some of the things that do you think it's equipped you in any ways better to deal with certain situations, or given you a strength of character in some sense, or even a sense of the mission? We talked about mission and identity sometimes clashing because our parents or our grandparents commit to service, to sacrifice for the mission of the church. And then the kids sometimes cop the fallout from that. But what are some of the benefits of your experience, your upbringing?
Yeah, I definitely think there are benefits, and I think it's given me a lot of resilience. I think I don't know if I would have been able to go away for a year overseas if I had never moved before, and I'm really grateful that I had that experience. I feel like it pushed me outside of my comfort zone a lot, and yeah, growing up, I feel like I've just been exposed to a whole variety of cultures, and that's always a benefit to be able to see the world from other people's perspectives, to have those conversations. I've been to a lot of countries. I have friends who I consider best friends who are all over the world. And I think that's awesome, as hard as it is sometimes to try and find where I belong, and have people that I love be so far away. I think there are a lot of pluses, and yeah.
Is there something that you think people kind of typically get wrong about either pastors' kids or third culture kids? Like, do you think we kind of assume something that maybe isn't true about them?
In what context?
You know how people just have ideas about, like, oh, pastors' kids are this, or third culture kids are this, or
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of people tell me to just get over it because it's amazing. Why should I? Why
Yeah.
why should I be struggling? You
Yeah.
know, or yeah. So that can be challenging, because I don't want to come across as saying, this is all terrible. This has ruined my life, but it does come with its challenges. So it's kind of a balance.
Yeah. It can be awesome and
And-
still a struggle. Like, those things can both exist, of course.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a lot of people were surprised you're now working for the church, even which is not surprising to me. But yeah, it's an interesting element that people make assumptions sometimes. As we wrap up this conversation, Ashley, we usually like to leave with something practical. What can I do about it? Um, I don't know if there's any themes that have come out of your life, or even just this conversation today, that you think, you know, this would really help our listeners to think about this week, or perhaps they can become a more welcoming group of people, and look for people who feel disconnected. Or yeah, what are your thoughts on how we can apply the learnings, the experiences that you've had into our lives in the coming week?
Yeah, well, I feel like I've come to this understanding that I don't belong in one place, but I belong a little in a lot of places. And I think that that's true for all TCKs, immigrant kids, really anybody who doesn't feel like they belong all in one place. Even if you don't feel like you have that place, that doesn't mean that you don't belong, a little bit in a lot of places. And I think that that's cool, and it's okay to embrace your differences, and to be able to say that, maybe I don't fit in, but that's okay. And to remember that ultimately your value comes from God. It doesn't come from other people. It doesn't come from um, other cultures and all of that. And yeah, so if you're struggling to find your place in the world, just take your time, try step out of your comfort zone, and I think that the people who will love you for you will find you. And also, I think understanding that life is full of seasons. I often say that my life is a collection of short stories, and that something will be different, something will change, because it always does, and that can be scary, but really good things can come from that.
Love it. Well, thank you for sharing your experiences and being so honest and open. It's been really cool. It's definitely not something that I've experienced, and probably not Jared either, but it's been awesome just to hear about your life and just the things that you've kind of come to. So thank you, Ashley, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Just before we go, I can see the wind outside Zanita's window picking up a little bit. As we're recording this episode, Cyclone Alfred is bearing towards South Queensland, Southeast Queensland. And so we're just thinking of you, Zanita, and we hope that the next day or two, when things are scheduled to hit, go well, that you stay safe, and all of our friends and family in Southeast Queensland stay safe as well. We just pray, that God protects that space, and that there's not too many catastrophic things happening. Even if property is damaged, that can be replaced, but human life is very precious. So we just hope that things go well for you, Zanita, and for everyone up there in Queensland.
It's definitely amped up since we started this episode. So go close all the windows and knuckle down.
All right. Well, on that note, we pray for the people of Southeast Queensland, and we just hope that they, the next week or so for them is a safe and good one. But until next week, hopefully we'll see you all again, same time, same place, and God bless you all.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.